Okay. So hi guys, welcome back to Kolom Remaja's IG Live. Kali ini ditemenin sama gue, Zania Putri, dan kali ini gue kedatangan tamu yang sangat special, which is Max. Do you want to say hi, Max?
Hi.
Jadi gue bakal kenalin Max itu siapa, tapi sebelum itu gue mau kasih overview dulu. Jadi topik yang akan kita bicarakan kali ini adalah tentang rasisme dan racial profiling, dan kita bakal ngomongin rasisme dan racial profiling itu kali ini specifically towards African Americans di Amerika Serikat. Gue yakin di beberapa hari kebelakangan ini news headline atau berita yang ada di TV dan di social media kalian pasti nunjukin kasus pembunuhan George Floyd. Dan kalau kalian belum tahu kasusnya George Floyd itu kenapa, jadi almarhum George Floyd adalah seorang laki-laki Afrika Amerika yang meninggal pada tanggal 25 Mei 2020. Nah, dia meninggal karena seorang polisi di Minneapolis berkulit putih, namanya Derek Chauvin, menginjak dengan lutut di leher Floyd selama kurang lebih 7-8 menit. Ketika ia berbaring tertungkup di pinggir jalan. Nah, tragedi ini direcord dan videonya tersebar di seluruh penjuru social media. Kalau kalian belum tahu atau belum lihat videonya, Kolom Remaja saranin untuk nonton rekonstruksi pembunuhan George Floyd dari different camera angles yang beda-beda, dan ini dibuat oleh New York Times. Judulnya 8 minutes and 46 seconds How George Floyd was killed in police custody. Nah, kasus pembunuhan ini sangat berhubungan dengan topik yang akan kita bicarakan. Selain itu, kita juga akan ngomongin tentang gerakan Black Lives Matter yang berkampanye melawan kekerasan dan rasisme sistematik terhadap Black people. Essentially, dari diskusi IG Live ini, Kolom Remaja berharap kalau ini akan menumbuhkan kesadaran orang-orang di Indonesia terhadap kasus dan problem tersebut, dan kita bisa menunjukkan support terhadap gerakan ini agar kasus-kasus kekerasan tersebut juga tidak terjadi lagi. Nah, sebelum itu, IG Live kali ini akan dilaksanakan dengan menggunakan bahasa Inggris, tapi jangan khawatir, IG Live ini juga akan di-upload di Instagram Kolom Remaja dan diberikan subtitle bahasa Indonesia, kurang lebih 5-7 hari dari sekarang. So, I guess let's start the discussion, Max.
All right.
Okay, before we delve into the topic, do you mind just telling a bit about yourself?
So my name is Maxwell Whyte. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I'm 18 years old. I am African American. And I attend Marist College, which is upstate New York.
My first question would be, what is it like to grow up as an African American in the US, and especially like in Brooklyn?
So to give in some history about like the African American history, growing up in this country is almost like a burden because 200 years African Americans been enslaved from 1600s to 1800s. So like when America like finally got their independence in 1776, it wasn't for us blacks. And so like after slavery was abolished in 1860s, like black people were considered like 3/5 a person. And then in the early 1900s, us African Americans, along with the minority groups, had to fight for our rights. And those simple rights would include like voting, educational laws, and even sitting at the same table as whites. And then not only that, but we have to take into consideration that systematic racism was integrated into this country, so that opportunities for a minority group, especially for black people, was harder to achieve.
Mm-hmm. So how does racism and like, before we get into systemic racism, affect you and your community? You mentioned about the history, right? So in the present day, like what is it like to be African American in the US?
Yeah, so growing up in New York City, the justification is like the process of improving districts to conform to like middle class taste and to cater to the rich. So happening like my neighborhood, where the rent will kick out people of color because they cannot afford it. So then that would mean like mostly predominantly white people would then kind of take our homes and stuff. And being that we are in this like marginalized group, before gentrification, we always have to deal with redlining, because redlining also had to play a huge like part in my neighborhood and the city. And redlining is redistributing and organizing a group of people, predominantly minorities, into their own community and sectors. Like, so I think it would be like called a modern day segregation system almost. So like for black communities, especially in East New York, when they get like private school government funded education, and Instead, we would have to opt out for stuff like charter school or public school with little to no support from the government. And it brings back to little things such as food, because most Black communities are located in like food deserts, meaning that there are an abundance of fast food restaurants, but there are no organic foods to help us, I guess, get the same amount of organic foods in the same vicinity.
Yeah.
So then, like, the health sources would say that Black people will always, 60% of Black people would always like obtain some type of heart disease, and that's mainly because we do not have like the tools to get organic food in our neighborhoods. So it also brings back to like how systematic racism plays into hand, because for example, in the whole national, like, for America, white families hold 90% of the national wealth and Blacks only hold 2%, which is crazy. So the wealth gap is always increasing. And then there's also little facts like African Americans are 2 times more likely to be unemployed. And in the educational system, it's crazy because like Black students are 3 times more likely to get suspended than their white counterparts who are students and do the same infraction. And according to like the prison system, I think Blacks hold almost half of the population in the prison system, which is crazy too. Bring up like the systematic racism and how it affects me and my community. The only thing that a Black person can really do to better themselves is have education. And it's crazy because we always say like defund the police, but we need to put that money towards the education, because currently the education system is bad, and that's how systematic racism is like kind of prominent, I guess. How I experienced it.
So, if you guys don't know what systemic racism is, racism basically means that there's like a racist system within the system itself. Like, for example, African Americans or like other minority groups, they're not really given the same chances as like a white person. And it also affects, for example, like crime rates, education, wealth gap. So that really contributes to the whole problem that we're currently facing. Do you have any other things, Max, to like really clarify what systemic racism is?
So because like this country is like built on race, it is integrated into the country so that people who are white can achieve more opportunities, and that's why we say they are privileged. Because if it was a minority group and if you were Black, it would be 10 times as harder to achieve the same thing your white counterpart may have. So that's why we're saying systematic racism is like kind of built into this country. So it will be very, very hard to change, because this country do run on race.
And especially it's because when the British Empire first came to America, it was meant for like, like white people. And then they tried to get all of them, like the Black people, and like enslave them to actually build the country. So obviously the system itself is obviously racist because it's meant for the white people and they never kind of like took consideration of people of color. Do you mind telling us about your views or maybe your experiences seeing how Black neighborhood is like heavily policed compared to white neighborhood, and where stop and frisk and police brutality is very much likely to occur?
I would say mainly again in the Black community, because especially like if you were to go to a high-end store, there will be like, I feel like the stop and frisk will be more prevalent there, because there will be like the security guards watching if you're going to pay for something, or even if you're going to the deli or the corner store, there will always be someone watching you to see if you're going to either steal something, put something in your pocket, and it just comes with the stereotypes behind that. And I hate, like, as I said, I hate stereotypes because not all people are conform to this bad idea of a whole and generalize a whole group. So that's really where their stop and frisk came from, because mostly predominantly like Black people will be stopped and frisked because of stereotypes, because we steal, because we do this and that, all these wrong ideas about us. And so that's how it kind of affected us, because you were also saying like I think you saw a post saying if I were to be stopped and frisked like 50 times, I would be like over it. And
Yeah.
just like imagine how many times a person is conforming to their own stereotypes about how you are and how they perceive you, and just like, but I'm not like that, or some of my people are not like that, so why do you generalize us like that? So it's kind of as I said before, like you have to develop eyes in the back of your head, especially when you're Black, because you have to be 10 times more conscious. You have to be 10 times more aware and 10 times more secure and responsible. Because if you don't, you won't catch things, and you could still like be wrongfully perpetrated for your actions you even do.
Yeah, definitely. And like I think the prejudice, especially with like stereotypes as well, people see a Black person as like a threat rather than
Mm-hmm.
a result of the injustice the US government is taking. Like they think of a Black person as like a threat all the time, and they always be suspicious about it, especially with just like a Black person doing their own business and got stop and frisk without, you know, any reasonable justification. But it wouldn't happen to a white person, I guess. Is it?
Mm-hmm.
Is it what's happening in America?
Yeah.
Okay, so in your opinion, like based on your experience and your views, like do African Americans receive equal protection, treatment, and access to justice in the United States?
Um, Obviously, like no, because till this day we're still fighting for like regular human rights that we should be able to have, which is crazy. And we're still being discriminated and wrongfully perpetrated for actions we may or may have not done, with the unjust response of actions in return. And also, it's so funny because I saw this post saying that trained cops are like most of them act on impulse or in any situation as seen in the past years or weeks, and but like untrained civilians, they have to stay calm and remain calm in all this with a weapon to point to their faces. And it's just like, how is it the opposite way around? Like, how is my executive branch that I'm supposed to be relying on security and protection going against me? And that's crazy because when I need help or in trouble, it's like I don't have that place in my heart where I could say, okay, let me call the cops, or
Yeah.
let me see if they could actually like understand my situation, or I have to think twice about calling them because I don't know what might happen. So especially being Black in America, you always have to understand that when reality hits and the cops are not on your side, what do you do? Like, who do you call?
Yeah.
Honestly, it's on you.
I also saw another post where this white lady called the cops while like a Black person was
Hmm.
not doing anything, and
Yeah.
she's literally saying like, "Oh, this person is attacking me," but like the Black guy literally recorded her. He's doing nothing. He's staying like 5 feet away from her, and the white lady literally called the cops. Hey, this guy is attacking me. Like, please come. When a white person knows that, okay, like the cops will 100%
Have
believe them, right?
privilege. They
Yeah, it's
understand.
about privilege.
Hmm.
So, talking about that issue, I'd also like to talk more about systemic racism. Like you mentioned how you grew up in Brooklyn as well. Like, I think in the old America, we kind of saw like segregation. So, for example, white kids only go to like white school, like white dominated school. And is it also what's currently happening in America? Like, do you go to a state school or like a public school or private school maybe that is predominantly Black or predominantly white?
Yeah, the school that I attend is predominantly Black and Hispanics,
Okay.
but I know that in some areas there are like predominantly white students, and then we call it PW, predominantly white institutions, and we also have HBCUs, which is called like historically Black colleges and universities.
Mm-hmm.
So I would guess that segregation is not like uh, in the school aspect or the educational aspect. Schools are able to like integrate people of color and white people together, but it still comes with the fact that people can still be racist. Even if you are like Black in a predominantly white institution, you could still face all this discrimination and microaggressions and racism.
Mm-hmm. But in terms of the school as an institution, like, do you think a predominantly Black and Hispanic school, for example, is more underfunded rather
Yeah.
than like a predominantly white school?
Because I believe that white people mostly they do get private education, especially when I go back to like justification and redlining. If they
Mm-hmm.
see that the majority people in that vicinity is white people, then I feel like the government have like some type of private school in place for them. But especially in a place like New York City, where there is a lot of minorities, they will try to have just public school education. I know that my charter school, it was very hard for us to gain support from the government. Like we had to actually have our funds be donated to us. So we would just be able to we would have to share a high school with 4 other high schools. And there would be like at least 400 kids, and we just have to share one hallway.
Oh my God.
So we are definitely underfunded. And if the government do give, I call it like block grants and categorical grants, which is the government gives the state money, and the government gives them the state money to allocate those funds to certain things, such as building new buildings and apartments or stores, or like a lot of just like commercial goods that you could get. But I feel like the educational system is super defunded.
Definitely. And like maybe we can talk more about like how redlining negatively affects like systemic racism. Do you mind like sharing or telling us more about what redlining is?
So like as I said before, redlining is basically distributing or organizing a group of people, especially like minorities, into one like sector. And especially in Manhattan, you can see that Manhattan, Brooklyn, and the Bronx, you can see that we have places like Little Italy and Chinatown, and those would be like examples of redlining because they have like their small community in those that the government like redistributes every, I think, 10 to 15 years. So it's easy to know like what group or what the majority minority, we would say, is in that type of vicinity. And so that could be hard because, well, that could be easy for the government because they can know where to allocate their money mostly to. So especially in New York, they could allocate like Manhattan. Since Manhattan, we have predominantly white people who stay there because it is expensive to like afford an apartment there. They'll probably allocate more money to Manhattan. But let's say for the Bronx is extremely underfunded, especially across the 5 boroughs.
We can kind of like sum up with redlining. The government literally put like red lines on the map. They decided which area to fund and like invest more as a community, so the potential investors in the future, they can like grow their business more, and like that area can be the predominantly good area to invest on in the future by private entity. But so do you think those red line areas are like occupied by mostly white people, and Black or Hispanics, for example, they don't really have an access to, own that kind of property by the banks or like given loans to do that?
I would say they make it as like, it's almost like a system because they see what the population is, and then that's when they redistrict, I guess.
Yeah.
But I don't know for all the other states, but I do know that for like New York especially, there's a lot of redlining, and it's been like a process over the past like centuries or decades that you can see where, as I said before, Chinatown is, and Little Italy is, and even Brooklyn across. Because it's like redlining has to do with, I think every 10 to 15 years, they would take a like population of who was mostly there in that vicinity, and then they would redistrict it from there.
And the effect of that redistribution obviously hasn't really benefited minority groups.
No.
So talking more about the injustice that minority groups, especially African Americans, are facing, we obviously knew what just happened like in the past 2 weeks. There's been a protest over the death of George Floyd, and I was just curious of what was your response when you knew what happened to him and when you heard about the news?
So I heard the news like in late May, and I was kind of desensitized towards it because it wasn't the first time I saw it. I believe that back to the age like 13, after Trayvon Martin, every single spring, it was like another Black man was dying and his dead body was being paraded on the internet. And so every year growing up with that mentality, it's like reality hits because I am growing up to be a Black man. So it's like when you see people who look just like you get hurt and die from the police officers, you can get desensitized towards it and you can get trauma from it. So what happened to George Floyd, I guess it was terrible. Like that was like the end for it because I was extremely aggravated and frustrated. Like I never had that much anger built up in me. And coming from like what I said before when I was desensitized towards it, I didn't really like reality doesn't hit you until you grow up.
Yeah.
So knowing me, I didn't because I was so little and small and thought I was just going to school, hey, whatever, it doesn't matter. I grow up to realize that my body is changing, I'm getting darker, I need to open my eyes out to see the world. And even if these situations do not personally happen to me, I have to take in consideration that these situations happen to people who look just like me. So I have to wake up.
Yeah.
So when I saw George Floyd's case, I was super aggravated and frustrated, and I had so much anger built into me.
Because like I feel like the response between like African American or like a black person compared to like other races would be so different. Because when I first got the news, I think I didn't really open like my Instagram at all that day, and then until one of my friends actually sent it to my Instagram and told me, okay, like this man wasn't resisting, and then
Mm-hmm.
he was killed by the police and it was caught on camera, and we had to kind of like sit there and watch him die and watch him suffocating because he couldn't breathe. And I feel like that kind of made people more aware of it. I mean, in the past, what people don't realize is it's happening probably every single day based on statistics.
Yes.
Every black person or like African Americans got killed, for example, every day by the police. But we are not really aware of it because it wasn't caught on camera.
Mm-hmm.
So like my next question is, would you say that what happened to George Floyd is just like the tip of the iceberg?
So in this case, then I would say yes. I guess it was the tip of the iceberg because, especially like saying for me, I was getting desensitized towards it, and I wasn't really paying it any mind. Like I would be mad at that moment, but then I realized that what if there's more cops that are doing the same thing that are like killing blacks who and it's just not taken on camera. Like you have to take that into consideration. So it's like although you may not see it, it doesn't mean that it's not happening. So as I said, once I come to terms that this is like a yearly thing that I'm starting to see every single spring, I'm just like when is everyone going to be as mad as I am? And so I guess this was the tip of the iceberg because when that video came out, people saw that he wasn't resisting. People saw that cop look up in the sky and his knee suffocating his windpipe in his throat as like his nose starts to bleed and him for 8 minutes saying, I cannot breathe, can you please get off of me? And then the other three officers just looking at him do it. And I think that's what really frustrated people because they had no right to kill him at all.
Yeah.
To see someone get killed for nothing obviously will bring frustration. So I guess this was like the tip of the iceberg, but we have to understand that this is not only like for, I guess, George Floyd, because there are still other people like Brianna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and even Darius Stewart and people who are still their police officer, their murderers are still on the loose, and we don't have justice for them yet. So in George Floyd's case, then yes, I agree that his justice was served because the cops did get charged, but I say it was the tip of the iceberg. And it's just like if this keeps on happening, because my friends were also saying like every single year when we always protest, like the protest always like dies down. But I'm always like, but do you understand that every time we protest, every single year when the same stuff is happening, it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And you have to realize that yes, you can say that peaceful protest doesn't work because you see it die down on the internet, but you can't always see what you see on the internet. And especially in this matter, we had like millions of people in Japan and Australia and Alaska march for us.
Yeah.
So it was like we're not the only ones in this. And to see other people on your side and want the same rights that you want for yourself just give you so much motivation to have you keep on doing what you want to like what you want to do and what you want help change.
So I guess my next question would be like, what do you think about people's reaction towards like the murder of George Floyd, considering like the reaction from the Black or African American community and probably like the national reaction and international reaction? Do you think it's enough, or do you think like it could be bigger, or like people could be reacting more towards this injustice?
Like in my personal experience, I think this was like a lot, enough. Of course, we should not stop. That's for one. But what I saw so far, I never saw in the past years, especially in New York City. Like, obviously, there were like cop cars that were being burnt and protesters in large groups just swarming into like the busy streets of New York City. And we saw even people like loot stores and stuff like that. And honestly, like people people from like the All Lives Matter or the Blue Lives Matter side might say that the world is ending or what have the country come to and this and that. But in my eyes, I see it as we're actually getting something done because our message was not being put across in these peaceful protests. But when they become violent, they want to listen to us. And as Malcolm X said, you have to learn the language of your oppressor. And if their language isn't peaceful, then you have to speak to them in another language, and that language was violence or having something or defunding the police or having actions for instead of just peaceful protesting. So yes, I believe that like peaceful protesting and even the violence that had weeks were justified.
Okay. I feel like other people are also kind of like trying to not support the movement. They're just trying to make excuses for that. And one of the reasons that they said was because this is about politics. And do you think racism is a political issue, or it shouldn't be a political issue?
So I would always say like you cannot run away from race, and I would say that it's an issue like of human natural rights. So like the fact that most Black people, including myself, feel unsafe by their own government like shows a lot. And because like the police who are supposed to be protecting us isn't just a political issue, but it's like a human rights issue. So I feel like you should be able to like talk to your family and peers in that situation, especially if you're a person of color, and definitely if you are Black. Because yes, race is heavily like integrated into politics, but you do not have to be a politician to acknowledge it. And so you shouldn't like simply ignore something because it makes you feel uncomfortable. Because like I saw this tweet from Vanessa Clans that said when you avoid like difficult conversations, you're trading a short-term discomfort for long-term dysfunction. So you do not have to be a politician to acknowledge that human rights are human rights, or that a person of the same skin color is worth as much as you.
And do you think the state and the government itself, let's say in New York, in terms of their response in handling the case, do you think it's enough? And I heard there's been like some progress as well happening because of the stuff that's been going on. And should they do more than what they've already done at this point?
What do you mean for like in general?
Yeah.
I would say in George Floyd's case, yes, justice had been served for him, but because like his murderers were charged, but it still makes me uncomfortable that the government didn't do anything until 15 other countries on top of all 50 states had to protest for that to happen. And it's also crazy thinking back to what if we didn't have the protests?
Yeah.
Like would they just be on the loose? Murderers on the loose? Like it didn't make any sense to me. So yes, in George Floyd's case, I think they were charged of second-degree murder. At first, they were charged for third-degree murder, and I was very pissed off because third-degree murder is only in the states of Minnesota, Florida, and I believe Pennsylvania. The other states have only second-degree murder and first-degree murder. So when I heard they gave them for third-degree murder, I was confused.
Yeah.
Because it was almost like, I guess, devaluing their actions when they should have got at least second-degree murder.
Okay, and I think the officer is also like charged with manslaughter as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in case, because I think what the legal arguments that I've been seeing as well is like it's really hard because people obviously want a first-degree murder because the officer would be charged for life in prison. But do you think second-degree murder would be a just result for the officer like Derek Chauvin at this point?
I would say yes. Second-degree murder will be fine, but I think, in my personal opinion, I feel like they should have got first-degree murder. But I do know that some states will like give a person first-degree murder and they will be off the hook. So to make sure that they do go to prison, I want them to get second-degree murder. And also, I feel like they would also, if you were to have first-degree murder, you would need like a significant amount of evidence proving that it was planned. And because that is very hard to is very hard to pull evidence in that matter, it would take like a lot of time to see if they would give them the first-degree murder charge. And I know that once it was on third-degree murder, they did 2 autopsies. And they were saying the reason that George Floyd died in the first place was because of his underlying health conditions. And the whole world were just confused because we were like, that has nothing to do with the situation. So then when they did a second autopsy, which is ridiculous, they understand that it was because his throat was closing up. And then so that's how he got the second-degree murder charge.
And I think how it came into like a conclusion of second-degree murder is also because how, even though it's probably unintentional, like he didn't plan to murder him that day, but he obviously knew what's going to happen to George Floyd when he knelt on his neck for 9 minutes straight.
Yeah. I believe his nose was bleeding too. So like people were telling him to get off of him. He didn't listen. And I think that it had to come with, I believe I saw on Twitter, I can't believe everything, but I think they did know each other in the past for at least like 12 to 15 years. So I think he knew George Floyd too. And with like as we hear the story, it just keeps on getting worse and worse. And I think that that police officer was actually like friends with Donald Trump. So
that would be like
we would know his views.
Political views as well. This is what I'm not getting. Like, I mean, from the video that I saw from New York Times of like reconstructions of different camera angles, it shows that George Floyd wasn't resisting. Like, he's just trying to tell the police that, okay, I can't get into the car because he's claustrophobic, if I'm not mistaken. Like, he's trying to tell the cops that, but the cops thought that, okay, he is resisting, and they put him into the ground. And like, what I'm not getting is, why do they have to, you know, like knelt on his neck for 9 minutes straight? And that's just excessive force.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be happening as well. And like, he obviously knew that if they did certain action to him, it would possibly lead to death. And people are saying from like the streets, from the pedestrian walks, like, okay, like he's dying. Like, look at his nose bleeding. But those police officers are just not considering or taking it into account. I think Derek Chauvin didn't even take his knee out, like from George Floyd's neck until one of the emergency officers told him, okay, like just remove it now, even though he's already unconscious, which is can't be explained.
Crazy.
So let's talk more about police brutality, because I feel like that's one of the craziest thing that's actually happening. I feel like people realize it more about police brutality after they see lots of footage from the internet looking at how brutal police is responding to citizens while their actual job is to serve and protect. And they've been saying it from like all the protests that's been happening. But can you tell us a bit more about police brutality in like day-to-day life other than protests?
I would say like day-to-day life, especially because like I am African American. Like when I went to that protest yesterday and I saw like, I think it was like 20 cops on the side over here, I did get a little intimidated and scared and frightened because I was like, I didn't know. I never been to a protest before. So I didn't know like how would they react. And of course people were like saying their monologues towards them, and they was just like hands behind their backs, just looking at us in silence. I really didn't know how to feel. And then also written on my shirt was like, oh, because I had like a picture of President Barack Obama, and then the back of the shirt it said like black man running from the black man running and not from the police, because Barack Obama didn't run for president. So I didn't know how they were gonna feel about that too, because I never like really been in contact with the police, but I do know that I may be stopped for no reason at all, and I feel like that's the scary part. Because especially like when I see in videos of like predominantly like black men, because I don't really see videos of black women getting, but we have to like keep in mind that black women are being affected by them as well. But when I see the videos of Black men like getting pulled over in their cars, and the person on the other side of the passenger seat are recording them, they're asking the cops like, "What did I do wrong? Can you please tell me what I did wrong?" And the cops are just saying nothing, and they just start handcuffing them and arresting them. And it just really doesn't sit right with me, because it's like, if I were to be able to walk on the street and the cops just stop me for no reason and just start putting handcuffs on me, how would I feel? Or how would I not resist or say, "What are you doing to me?" and not have an answer? Like, it's very hard to like experience that situation, because you still don't know what you would do. And as I said before, like, if you are a civilian, you will be trained, you would have to like be ready for that to happen, especially if you're a Black. To just have a police officer just walk up to you and charge you or arrest you and do this and that, you don't know their intentions. But for your white counterparts, it's the complete opposite. Like, once you call them, they're on the way. Once you call them, they are going to protect you. But like Black people, they have to think twice and say, okay, what will happen in this situation? Will they understand my situation? Will they feel the same I feel as in this situation? Like, they have to always have questions like that, because we know that sometimes the police are not on our sides at all.
Yeah. What people has not been getting from like the Black Lives Matter movement is African Americans are getting pulled off by the police by no reasons, because just like a little bit of a background. So a police has to have reasonable grounds to kind of like stop and frisk you. So if they have reasonable grounds, they're allowed and legal to do so. But if they don't have reasonable grounds, that makes it illegal. And that's what African Americans are currently facing, if I'm not wrong or if I'm not mistaken. Because of the stereotypes and all of the prejudice that Black people or African Americans or even other minority groups are facing, they're seen as threats. So even like the smallest move can be argued as like reasonable grounds, which is ridiculous, because if a white person does the same thing, the police would just let them to do it.
Yeah.
Do you mind like telling us more about Brianna Taylor? Because like we haven't really covered it more, even though it's sort of been circling out through social media.
Yeah, so Brianna Taylor was African American woman, and so far the only story that we know is the cops showed up at her house and they shot her in her own hallway. And people are still forgetting that like she needs justice too. And I think there was a petition going online to reopen her case because her murder was still on the loose. So I think they reopened that case, I believe this week or like last week, like in on Thursday or Friday.
Because I think the case was about a police just came into her house without knocking, and like she was shot at that moment.
Yeah, no.
And I think it was it legal to do it, or
I don't believe it was legal to at this point of the story, we don't know what, like, the only thing we know is that she was shot in her house. That's all.
Yeah.
We don't know what she did, but I think it's clarified that they just shot her for probably no reason at all. Or probably, like, from false accusations, what she probably may have done. But so far, I believe that, knowing how the cops operate, she probably didn't do anything. Or she probably didn't do a huge thing for them to have killed her.
Yeah. And I think that's the crazy thing about this whole mess. It's because the victim could never tell the story because they're dead, while it's the police officer, which is the perpetrators, that narrate the story. And obviously, without the victim's point of view,
you only see one side.
Exactly. And I feel like Black people don't really have that much access to justice as well compared to like a white person if it happened. And I think it's good that people are taking care attention of this. And my next question is about looting. So people are also kind of like making excuses for not supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, because I want to support the movement, but they ended up looting the stores and like protesting and like rioting. What's your response towards that? Like, are they being inconsiderate and always try to have excuses not to show support towards the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yeah, definitely, because for the people who are like so heavily involved with looting, it just doesn't make any sense, because the whole focus of this is Black Lives Matter movement. and to stop discriminating and to notice that Black lives are being harmed. And when they brought up looting, that little small minority, it's like the whole focus just shift. And it's like, why are people just focusing on looting now when we have the bigger picture right in front of your eyes? And so, like, for me, I don't even think looting is a problem because no one said anything when KKK was looting like Black people for their bodies, their souls, their family members, when they were burning down our churches, when they were burning down our businesses. Like, no one said anything about that. And it's so funny because, like, as I said, America has like a looting problem. So like obviously we know about economic imperialism and how they looted Africa for their oil and their gold and their salt. And they even had this thing called manifest destiny doctrine saying, oh, we are able to like expand our property in the Western hemisphere because God told us to. And what that translates to is we are able to take your property and your land, but just wrapped up in a pretty package and just call it manifest destiny. And that's what's really wrong because it's like, how are you saying that Black people are looting in stores, whatever, and how is that your broader, bigger picture when you don't go back to analyze your own history of your own country and notice that your country's been looting from other countries for years.
Yeah.
And the KKK been looting Black people lives for years. And the police department been looting other people of color and especially Black people's lives for years. Like, it doesn't make any sense. So when people always come to me about that situation about looting, how do you feel about this and that? I feel like what America don't understand is they're so one-sided. And I also saw this this poster saying that like America is so racist that when you protest about the racism, people think you're protesting about America as a whole.
Yeah, definitely. One of the problems as well is they always see looting as, oh, it's only African Americans who loot. But what they fail to understand is the media also failed to kind of portray that white people also do it. And like even police in on the internet, like the police also do it as well. And
those undercover cops.
Yeah, and people always think that, oh, they just pull it on protest and make it as a riot, and it ended up being like looting just because they want to loot and they want to take stuffs, but it's not the situation. Like from my perspectives to addressing the issue, looting itself caused by riots, and riots itself was caused because the police couldn't handle the peaceful protesters, and the protest itself is because of the injustice. So if they really want to fix the whole problem, they have to start with the root, which is fix the injustice and racism.
Because the whole point why we're rebelling is because, as I said before, one of our tactics were to defund the police departments because it's quite obvious and like apparent that the country love putting commerce goods and capitalism over Black bodies. So when we defund the police, they will start to realize that, oh, like this money flow is starting to become less apparent and it's going to start to decrease. And then they're going to take into consideration saying, okay, we'll give you what you want because the money is not here. So that's why like one of the tactics is to defund the police because they try to incorporate more training and they try to incorporate these spy cams on the vest of the police officers, but they're not getting us anywhere. So they have to, and I feel like they always have to start with the, like as you mentioned before, the root of the problem. The root of the problem is injustice. So if you act like this, we are going to act like this. Like we're not just going to sit there and take it. Like if you think that, especially like as I said before, like Black lives over commerce goods and capitalism, because it's like very apparent that the government care about money more than Black lives. Or they care about money more than their police officers murdering people and them not even having a case opened to just get charged. So it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Okay, so I think because we talked about looting as well and we talked about like police brutality, I think people don't really get the idea of defunding the police. People will think that, oh, how will it get us safer if we defund the police? Do you care to explain more about the idea of defunding the police and the rationale behind that?
Like the police departments, I believe they get like millions of dollars based on the police to have the police like carry out the laws and reinforce it to the civilians. So I feel like why would we give them more funding, especially if they are the ones in the country that are getting like one of the most like money? Why would we give them more money when they aren't even doing their jobs, which is protecting us? So we are defunding the police essentially to redistribute that wealth into like black communities that need it. And we're trying to redistribute all the money that the police departments are getting and turning that money into education for people who need it. So it's
Yeah.
like the whole situation that the whole I guess argument for like why we're defunding the police departments is to make sure that not only when the government see that their money being isn't coming through because of the, what's happening, they will understand that we are essentially taking away your money until you get your act together. And instead of using so much money for things that are not going to do us no good or who are not going to protect us, we're going to start to redistribute that money into places where we need it, which goes back to the
Yeah.
public school systems and the charter schools and the redlining, like all of that. We have to think about where to reallocate this money to so that it's not just being wasted. Because it doesn't make any sense to fund police departments that do not care about you and who are going to murder you when you could use that money for things that are better to better yourself. Oh, so that's why
Sure.
like, we're also like having like in my link there's like donations where everyone could just donate to like the cause and everything.
And talking about like police brutality and everything, people also realize that like there's been an ongoing movement called Black Lives Matter movement. And I feel like people sometimes misinterpreted the meaning of Black Lives Matter movement, where they think that the whole movement is saying that only Black Lives Matter or Black Lives Matter more. And some people even supported the All Lives Matter or like the Blue Lives Matter
Hmm.
movement. And do you mind like explaining more of the distinction between those movements currently going on?
I believe that the people who are on the side of saying like all lives matter or like blue lives matter, like yes, we get that, but you have to understand first that like Black lives matter first because like it's apparent that especially in this country that is built on systematic racism, that we are getting wrongfully perpetrated for actions that we have not done and killed. Like our people are
Yeah.
getting killed, so it doesn't make sense to say that all lives matter when we don't have justice or we don't even have the human rights that you have like
Yeah.
as your white counterparts. So when we say like Black Lives Matter, we're not just saying only Black Lives Matter. We're not just saying Black lives are the only lives that should matter. We're saying you should start to realize that we are still being wrongfully perpetrated for the wrong things, and we are having actions and consequences that shouldn't be done to us, and it's affecting our community heavily. So I feel as if people are just saying the All Lives Matter movement to just be ignorant, and especially like I feel like you would really have to be ignorant to say that all lives matter because if you don't understand that there are people in this country who are being killed for unjust reasons and biases, how could you say all lives matter? When what you really mean to say is sexist, classist, elitist, racist, white, ignorant people lives matter more than other people's.
Yeah. Sorry to cut you, but I think because Instagram Live has a time limit of an hour, we'll have to end this first session and
Right.
then we're gonna go on with like a second Instagram Live after we end this one.
All
So I'll see you in the
right.
next Instagram Live, and I'll see you guys, well, the audience, in the next Instagram Live as well. Okay, so I guess let's start with the discussion. So I think we talked more about like Black Lives Matter before, and you were saying that it's not because, and it's not the right interpretation to interpret Black Lives Matter movement as Black Lives Matter more or only Black Lives Matter, but they're basically asking, or they're basically saying that black people have been fighting their injustice, they've been murdered and they've been killed because no reasonable grounds. And what do you think is the right interpretation of All Lives Matter and the Blue Lives Matter?
So for the when they say blue lives matter, it basically says like they're translating it to like the cops since they wear like a blue uniform, like their lives matter more or this and that. And the all lives matter, I feel like the majority, predominantly people who do say all lives matter are most likely racist or ignorant, either of the two, because they do not understand that the system, as I said before, the system in America will only function for you if you are white and you have a like a type of persona that you are sexist or classist or elitist or racist. Like that's what that movement means. And so it even like when I went to the protest yesterday, even like had I think a person in their car when we were protesting kept on saying all lives matter and all lives matter. And there was a person about to like that was tapping on the car door and saying, why would you say that? Like read the room. There are like hundreds of people with who are coming here with a problem, and you're just disregarding that whole movement and that whole problem. You're not acknowledging that. You're being so closed minded and ignorant. So when people do say all lives matter, I feel like it's very offensive because it's saying that like how could you say all lives matter when my life is obviously not put on the table?
I think the right interpretation would be like all lives matter until Black Lives Matter then.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of like the All Lives Matter movement, I think people are also saying that white people also got killed by the police. And in terms of like the whole numbers, people are saying that, oh, white people got killed more by the police rather than Black people. What would your response be towards that statement?
So I would say that, like, to bring it back a little bit, like the premise, I would say, because we have to like take into consideration that like even though Black lives are being put on the line and Black people are dying, you have to realize that there are still Black people that are being put to jail for no reason, who are in prison for no reason, and that's why I feel like they hold such a majority in that they almost hold half the prison system. With that being said, it's like they're just charging us and putting us in prison for like years to come for no reason, or they have a reason for it, but the trial and what happens afterwards does not reflect like what the person's actions did. So I feel like especially with I believe like marijuana, like there are many Black people who get charged for this, and it's so funny because we were put in prison for this, but other people are profiting over it, and this doesn't make any sense. Like that's one example. And to bring back to your question about like the majority, because like the majority of people in America are white. That's why we are the minority, because we are Black. So when you put the numbers together, I it just wouldn't be like statistically like accurate to say that white people are being more incarcerated and this and that, because if you were to look at the population size, obviously being that Black people are the minorities in this country, and more of us are being held in the prison system and more of us are dying because of Black lives, it does not correlate or translate or equal to the amount of white people who are or less than to the white people who are being incarcerated, because that wouldn't make any sense, because now you're just comparing two population sizes and saying that this number is bigger than this number. So obviously they're like are not bettering off of the situation, but that wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, there's only like 14% of Black people in America.
Yeah.
And as you said, like it occupied 50% of the prison system. And if you compare those statistics between each other, it definitely didn't cancel out each other. And I feel like what they also understand is they always look at, like the pure number rather than the proportion. And they kind of like got misled from there. And my other question is, so do you think Black people got into prison or like even got killed by the police because of things that wasn't really justified, and like things that very superficial that wouldn't happen to a white person in America? For example, there's this girl who was sentenced to 51 years in jail because she killed her rapist, but another white boy, like he was only sentenced to, if I'm not mistaken, like 3 months in prison.
I believe it was 3 to 6 months for like being a pedophile and like raping, I guess. I don't know what they said, but he'd been doing it for 3 years and it was multiple children and he did not get the same charge. And that's the type of injustice that we're seeing here, because it is so apparent and so frequent when you go on like a social media site and you see these and people are making these comparisons of like a white person to get charged of something and like a black person or a person of color to get charged in this situation, you will always see that the black person always get the higher charge. And it just doesn't make, it's like it's so backwards. And I even believe that when people were out past curfew, there was, I think, a white man, he got a bond of like a bail of, I think, $100, but the black man, he was outside the curfew at the same time and his bail was $500. So it's just like, it is so apparent that we could literally put like there's Instagram accounts and platforms and especially Twitter, they're putting like situations and cases side by side and saying, why is this so backwards? Why is this so backwards? Like, how are they facing almost life to prison for being morally correct, and the other person is sentenced to a couple of months to a year? It just doesn't make any sense.
And I think one of the other things that I realized from the whole Black Lives Matter movement is also about, like, I think people question why the police has to, use excessive force or even like stopped and frisked a black person. But what people can't really understand about the situation is black people got stopped and frisked for no reasonable grounds, and they just got stopped and frisked just because of their skin color. Because I feel like people see, as I said, black people or like minority groups as a threat, while they don't see the white counterparts as the same thing. Do you feel the same way, or do you have
Yeah,
anything to add?
because like now that the situation is like becoming more apparent, people are realizing that these unjust killings are not only happening like once in a while, but they're happening, God knows, like every single day.
Yeah.
And if we're lucky, there is happening on camera for us to see and have us really open our eyes and then question reality, saying, wow, this is crazy. Because I would say that we're furious, like all this built-in anger. And it's like it's taking, like, of course it would take so long because this government wasn't built for us anyways.
Yeah.
Like, as I said before, in the history, we're three-fifths a person. So it's like, being that we are still, being that they gave us all the rights we think we have, it's still almost backwards because the country that gave us our rights is almost like they're being taken away from us.
Yeah.
So it's like it's just canceling out, and we're just sitting here like what's happening? Like we made it so far just for you guys to break us all down again. Like it doesn't make any sense.
And I feel like it must be really frustrating to, like realize the reality that people that's supposed to serve and protect you are actually like killing your community.
Yeah,
And
because I was saying that like especially if you're black, you have to develop eyes in the back of your head. Like you have to be 10 times more aware, 10 times more conscious, responsible, because even if you are 10 times more of the things that I said, you are still able to be stopped by a police officer for no reason, just because of the things that are integrated in their heads about the stereotypes happening. So it's like you really can't win in a situation like that, because no matter how much you try to, especially coming from people who that are like racist or who do stereotype, it'll be hard for you to try to switch that because they already have like a set persona and identity for you and your people, which is stereotyping or grouping up, like marginalizing a group or discriminating or using microaggressions towards them because of their skin color. It would be almost nearly impossible for them to know who you really are, what your true identity is.
yeah.
So that's why like I feel like we're furious because how dare you like marginalize a whole group based on your ignorant, close-minded stereotypes?
With the whole Black Lives Matter movement, how important do you think it is to support the movement both in the US and internationally?
Well, I say that it is very, like personally me, it's very motivating seeing like people internationally support this cause because when people are just sitting there silent, you feel like no one is on your side, or you feel that, especially coming from a Black person, you feel like your anger isn't justified, your feelings are not validated.
Yeah.
So when I see people who think the same as me and my other like Black counterparts, and saying that we are being like supported, it just gives us so much hope that we're not the only ones who are fighting for this, but we have other people from other races and other ethnic backgrounds that are fighting for us too. And and even like the white people who do support us, or who do use their privilege in the right way to make us feel that we are protected by at least someone.
Yeah.
So I would say it is very important that we are it's very important that it is international. And again, I was saying how like London and even like many places were just marching, even Japan were marching for us. Like it wasn't, it turned into like, it was race at the beginning. It was like Black Lives Matter, and then like Black people against like our country, I would say. But then as people started to open their eyes and support us, it became to be a situation where it was racism against everyone else.
Yeah, I think it's also the situation. Like, I think what I see in London and Italy and Germany, I think
Mm-hmm.
racism towards the people people of color, and especially people with darker skin color, is always happening.
Yeah, it's
And
very prevalent.
yeah, and it's happening in like all over the world. And we also have to acknowledge like white privilege, and they have to use their privilege carefully, because I think because more people from like not just Black people like supporting the whole movement, people can achieve more, and government listens more to that and responds more to that. I think in London and in Bristol in the UK, they also threw down like a Confederate general statue,
Mm-hmm.
which did racism back in the day. And I feel like that's also like a sign of movement. And from the whole protest, we've also seen lots of progress as well. If I'm not mistaken, LAPD also already declared to defund their police.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Minnesota is also doing the same
No.
thing, or Minneapolis. So I
And
think, yeah, I think it's really worth it to like fight for the injustice. And in your opinion, like, has the U.S. government done their best to eradicate racism, police brutality, and racial profiling towards Black people and Americans?
I would say no, because like I was saying before, because like there are still like white people who are racist, and especially like even branded stores, whatever, it'll be like very hard for a Black person to just simply get a job, because they will look at your name, or like even in the application they will look at your race, and will like, and your race will kind of be like the determining factor if you will be hired in that job, for example, or for instance. And we have like a lot of cases, such as like big institutions here like Ivy Leagues, or even like just top tier colleges in general. Like they would also use this thing called affirmative action, which provides like Black people to get the okay, so like for example, many institutions, especially like top tier colleges, they would promote diversity on their campus. And what they would
Yeah.
say is, we have a lot of like students of color and international people on our campus, so we have a, I guess, more diverse campus and population. So you are welcomed here. You're welcome to apply here. But then it also comes, also like backfires when you say all this stuff, but you still don't support us. And like when we want to have like an international group, and when we want to have a BSU group, which is like a Black Student Union group, or like find those safe spaces on campus, it is very underfunded, and it's hard. And it's like you promote, and like even if we do have even if we do have a population that is very like mixed or diverse, it doesn't it doesn't like rule out that the white people can be racist, or even the people of color can be discriminative towards like Black people as well. And that's not what the colleges are like considering. Because like I know, especially like when something goes on, especially on my campus, like you are still, because of your skin color, you still have like microaggressions. from like even the security guards or the faculty that works at your school, or they will allocate you some money for your BSU, which is Black Student Union. They will allocate you some money for that, or even if it's like a Hispanic group, they'll allocate a little bit of money in that, but it's super underfunded than the other clubs on campus. So it's like Black people's are out, and like sometimes they would say how the only reason why we got our spots is because of affirmative action.
Yeah.
And that's very like stereotypical because it's saying I didn't like even when I go to the dentist, for example, and I'm wearing my college sweatpants, they're like, "Oh, are you a football player? Are you an athlete like of some sort?" And I'm like, "No, like I got into the school because of my grades."
Yeah.
You're undermining me, and you're saying that I just got into the school because of a sports academic like career, or I just got into the school because of affirmative action. Like you're starting to belittle me, and
Yeah.
that's the passive like aggression that people do not understand. That when you say things that come out of your mouth, it does have a lot of meaning, especially if you are white and you start to say things to just to ask a question or whatever. Like you have to be very mindful of that because in my instance, I'm like, do this person see me as smart as I am, or does this person see me as a go to college for free card because I'm an athlete or whatever? When you're just stereotyping me and I'm not an athlete and I just got in here because of my grades, like everyone else.
Yeah.
It's like they never compare you to anyone else. It's like your situation based on your skin color is different from everyone else. So it's just another form of typing.
Yeah. So I think from what you're saying, like the like American institutions and governments are trying to make it more diverse, but the problem is within the community itself, they're still underfunded and they
Hmm.
still just try to make it as like a publicity to,
Yeah,
eventually raise more money towards the college or the institution itself. And I think what I think is really good about the whole protest is there's so many progress as well, especially like people like bills are put in like House of Representatives, like legislations are changing, and I think more like police departments are also got defunded because people believe that, oh, you have to support the community more in like education, um, rather than like funding the police to like not do their
your
best to
job.
serve and protect. And not to make this political, but obviously we can't separate the point of government and the president itself because the
Hmm.
president rules the government. Do
Yeah,
you think Donald Trump has given like serious attention and implemented policies to stop this from happening?
I would say that like the only thing that he implemented were his tweets,
Yeah.
like his gross tweets, disrespectful tweets, saying that like if the looting starts, the shooting starts, like giving militia rights to kill protesters or looters, like to shoot them, and that tweet actually got violated. And it's like in a crisis like this, especially when we have like Nike or even Bratz dolls, like little corporations and companies that are giving their condolences towards the Black Lives Matter movement, it is like where's our president? Like the only information we have about our president right now is that he is hiding in the bunker because it is so unsafe outside, unsafe to them. So it's like the president did not give um any serious like speech or even on television about what's going on. Like he's just doing nothing about it. Maybe a couple of tweets here and there, but other than that, you have not seen a live or a live broadcast or a message from the president saying that, oh, I support this move, we should do this and that. Like he's nowhere to be found. He's in his bunker. Like we don't know where he is. So he has not given it serious attention at all.
And I think I saw this a couple of days ago from this YouTuber called Legal Eagle. So he's living in Washington, D.C., right? And I think there's a park near the White House where people also protest there. And near that park, there's like this church where Donald Trump also took the photo op, the Bible picture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think before he went to that church, he made like a speech about the Black Lives Matter movement, and he instructed these people that are armed to actually tell the protesters to go away. And he only gave like 30 minutes interval to give that instruction. And obviously, people are not seeing this. People are not knowing that, oh, we're gonna be dismissed in 30 minutes. It ended up as like what started as a peaceful protest to a riot.
But also, like, bringing back to what you said before about how, like, basically how he said, like, if the looting starts, the shooting starts. Like, me as a protester, if I were to go outside and the president is giving people who are armed the right to kill us, how would I feel?
Yeah.
And, like, it's almost like a fascist idea because you're saying you have all this power that you're saying. It's just crazy to think about. It's like there are unarmed people at a peaceful protest, and even if there is looting going on, they're not going to be arrested. They're going to be shot instead. So I think it's just crazy to think about. Like, even if I'm looting, and there are some people looting in the background, all looting for instance, or we're just telling the cops how we feel, they have the right to shoot us. And so what that basically translates is to stop the protests.
And I think what's crazy is the fact that, especially with the Blue Lives Matter movement, people expect unarmed civilians to be, like calmed down while they're being held at gunpoint by a police, like an armed police. And they still think that, for example, like minority groups such as like African Americans are at fault. And it's just crazy to think about that. And I think I also came across this point called, habeas corpus.
Habeas corpus. And it's like saying whatever, like, if the police were to do something that is unlawfully, whatever, to like a regular person that they're about to arrest or charge, they have the right to do so. Which is saying that whatever were to happen in that situation and the police were to happen to like act on impulse or do something wrong that is against the law, they have the right to do it. So they have the right to feel like that. Mm-hmm.
And I think there's another legal doctrine called qualified immunity, which basically made it impossible to sue the police as well, right?
Yeah.
And it's basically saying like you can't sue the police department because, well, the rationale is because the police department will get bankrupt. And the whole legal doctrine made it so impossible for you to actually like sue the police department.
Yeah.
And obviously like made it more impossible for people to get access to justice. And I think they're also trying to abolish qualified immunity as well based on like online petitions, right?
Because I heard that they brought habeas back, but I think that one, will be unconstitutional because I think they banned that. But especially when they still have qualified immunity, if they have qualified immunity, then it's almost the same thing. So it's like, I don't know where they're trying to get at.
Yeah. So, like coming to that statement, like what's your message to all the young people that are watching and will be watching this video in the future?
I would have to say, like, donate if you can, and if you cannot donate, there's definitely like YouTubers who are using their platform to speak on it. So I know that some YouTubers, for example, are making sure that whoever watches their videos for the next like 3 weeks to a month, all the revenue that YouTube give them for their channel will be donated to Black Lives Matter. So even if you do not have any money to give, there's definitely like a source of donating or giving back you can do, like, and especially people who are not who are afraid of, like, because coronavirus is still very much real.
Yeah.
So if you do not want to protest or go outside and speak on it, you should speak on it like in person. You should do it in on social media because your voice is really impactful. So make sure that you could try the best as you can to also be like open-minded and understand other people's point of views, but also to like remain true to yourself and think of your beliefs first. and then also try to encourage and educate your families on this too, and your friends and peers, and ask how they feel about it. It's a great discussion to talk about, and it also brings you back to reality, as I said before, because you would understand like how you're. It's also like a almost reevaluating the people in your life to see if they really truly care about you. And I would also say like don't let nothing stop you,
Yeah.
especially because like growing up as an African American, the only thing that you really have to get out of corruption is your education. So when people belittle you or tell you this and that, just know that you're staying true to yourself. And the microaggressions and the ignorant comments, yes, they do matter because they have to be put to a stop, but you know what's true to yourself that is not true. And you're the
Yeah.
only person that you have at the end.
And I feel like it's also really like for us who are not, African Americans or like Black people that are actually living through this experience. I feel like it's also really important to educate ourselves as well, because I
Yeah.
feel like it's not your responsibility as the victim of the situation to actually educate us, especially with the advantage of internet and our access to internet. It's really important to educate ourselves and acknowledge our privilege. And I feel like it's such a privilege to be able to educate ourselves rather than living through
Experience it. Yeah.
experience. Yeah,
It's
definitely.
like much a privilege to be able to just see or educate yourself on these topics instead of having a person who actually experienced on this matter, especially in the Black community where you see your brothers and sisters die. So it's like if you can educate yourself on these topics, then it will be a great deed that you would do, because not only are you gaining from the benefits of supporting your fellow Black counterparts, but you are also encouraging yourself to have open-minded discussions and think beyond and not and broad and not too straightforward to a topic, or have ignorant thoughts that are behind, or even using your privilege as a passive advantage, I guess. So it's very
Yeah.
important to educate yourself in these topics, especially when they're like on platforms or even on social media to be easily accessible too.
Yeah. And especially like nowadays, it's not enough to be not racist, but we also have to act as anti-racist as well.
Hmm.
Like just being silent when like racism is happening is clearly not enough. And we also have to speak up towards injustice and like racism, and should try our best to actually end this whole thing. And I think one of the other things is also like to start conversation as well. When we've already educate ourselves, it's also important to start the conversation, especially with people that is not really educated towards this matter as well. So like we help spread the movement,
Awareness, yeah.
and people are like more united towards this issue. Like it's easier to end this rather than people being just ignorant and not acknowledging this issue.
Yeah, your silence is betrayal.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Okay, so I feel like we've already talked for like more than 1.5 hours, and thank you so much for all of your experiences and information and inputs. It's really been like eye-opening in my opinion, because I've always seen it from the internet of what's going on, and hearing like an African American to talk about your experience as well and what you're saying is something different. And it also like made me realize of like the privilege of not living through that situation as well. So
Yes.
thank you so much, Max. I hope your dentist appointment is gonna go well.
Yeah. Thanks for considering,
So
but
yeah,
thank you for having me.
no worries. Okay, so I'll see you later, and I'll speak to you later too.
All right, later.
Bye.
Bye.
So, hi guys, gue mau bilang makasih udah tune in di Instagram Live Kolom Remaja bareng Max. Gue harap semua informasi, penjelasan, dan pengalaman yang udah dibagi sama Max bisa jadi salah satu hal yang gue bilang eye-opening dan ngebuat kalian juga sadar tentang masalah rasisme ini. Dan yang gue bilang berkali-kali di live-nya, menurut gue kita tuh privileged enough untuk nggak live through the experience as well. Dan sebelum IG Live ini gue tutup, gue representing Kolom Remaja pengen ngomongin tentang how we should reach towards this matter. Dan sebelum itu, gue juga mau announce kalau misalnya kalian punya pertanyaan, kalian juga bisa DM Kolom Remaja dan Max bakal jawab pertanyaan itu di Instastory kita. Dia bakal bikin video dan dia juga bakal bikin post tentang untuk jawab pertanyaan kalian. Instagram Live ini akan kita download dan kita buat subtitlenya dan akan di-upload lagi dalam 5-7 hari. Nah, sebelum itu, yang gue bilang, Kolom Remaja juga pengen bikin closing statement. Kita declare kalau we support the Black Lives Matter movement dan kita juga support the anti-racist movement. Dan sebelum itu, gue juga mau kasih beberapa opini dari kita sendiri. Kalau masalah ini bukan hanya masalah rasisme di Amerika. Masalah ini udah terjadi dari lama dan mungkin kita sendiri juga nggak sadar kalau kita juga kadang terindoktrinasi bahwa rasisme itu hal yang wajar. Itu hal yang nggak bisa diubah. And as I said, masalah ini bukan cuma rasisme towards African Americans di Amerika, tapi rasisme ini juga towards people who have darker skin color. Dan mungkin juga dari efek post-colonialism karena kita colonized by the Dutch, which is white people essentially. Dan gue nggak tahu kalau kita sadar atau enggak, tapi kadang definisi cantik atau tampan atau good looking itu dilihat dari, biasanya orang bilang, oh cantik ya putih. Dan mungkin kalian juga nggak sadar as we grow up, kadang orang juga bilang kayak, kenapa sih kamu hitam banget, pakai body lotion dong biar putih. Dan meskipun intention dari orang-orang yang bilang hal tersebut itu buat ngebuat kita mungkin untuk menjaga kebersihan, kita juga jadi terjebak dalam mindset kalau white is good and black is bad. Dan kita selalu ngerasa kalau people with darker skin color is less than us, while they're not. Dan yang mau gue sampein dan Kolom Remaja sampein adalah all humans are equal, there's no superior race, dan no matter what your religion is or like what your belief is, gue yakin Tuhan atau higher entity, if you believe that, ngeliat semua manusia sama tanpa memandang warna kulitnya. Dan gue juga mau bilang kalau masalah rasisme terhadap orang kulit hitam atau orang with darker skin color ini juga terjadi di Indonesia terhadap orang-orang Papua. Dan Kolom Remaja akan cover a special segment and special episode tentang rasisme terhadap orang-orang Papua dan gerakan Papuan Lives Matter juga minggu depan. Maka dari itu, kita juga nggak bisa lengah dari hal ini, dan sebagai anak muda, di mana kita masih bisa buat perubahan, karena we are agent of change, cara pertama yang kita bisa lakuin adalah dengan mengedukasi diri kita sendiri. We're privileged enough to be able to educate ourselves by watching documentaries, movies, atau even baca buku daripada harus belajar dari pengalaman tentang injustices yang harus kita alamin. Dan there is no excuse, to be honest, buat semua orang yang punya access to internet dan juga lagi libur. Kalau bisa kalian bilang kalian gabut, ya coba untuk berusaha untuk educate yourself. Kolom Remaja sendiri juga akan bantu untuk share lots of resources. Kita juga bisa belajar dari Instagram, kita bisa belajar dari documentaries, dari Netflix, kita juga bisa baca buku. Jadi sebenarnya tuh resourcesnya udah ada, dan ini tuh harus dimulai dari kita sendiri untuk punya niat untuk belajar tentang itu dan peduli tentang problem ini. Dan yang kedua adalah start the conversation. All changes that happen gak cuma langsung terjadi tanpa percakapan. Kasarnya ya Indonesia aja bisa merdeka karena ada percakapan, dan itu juga karena mereka percaya kalau ya udah kita nggak bisa diem aja tentang colonialism by the Dutch. Dan dengan mulai percakapan, entah itu mulai dari sharing a post di Instagram sampai ngobrol konstruktif sama teman atau keluarga kalian, itu helps the change. Chose to be silent about the issue dan ngerasa kalau kalian itu nggak rasis, itu nggak cukup. And what we need to be is to be anti-racist. And the importance of speaking up juga udah berbuah banyak hasil di Amerika, di mana kita juga bisa belajar dari gerakan-gerakan itu. Dari semua protes yang terjadi, as I said, pemerintah juga lebih responsif dalam menanggulangi masalah-masalah ini. Dan perubahan-perubahan tentang legislasi juga sekarang terjadi. Dan semua hal ini terjadi karena people speak up and voice out their concerns. Nah, yang terakhir itu act upon it. stop using the N-word, then stop racial discrimination towards Black people and speak up towards a racist person and explain it to them that it's wrong. Gue sadar kalau hal ini juga mungkin lebih sulit untuk dimengerti buat orang-orang yang nggak pernah tinggal sebagai kaum minoritas dan punya privilege di sebuah negara atau di sebuah society. Then I'm going to be blunt, but it's a shame for people who only love Black cultures and idolize Black celebrities, but not doing anything about this injustice. Then kita bisa support sebagai allies dan support to end racial injustice. So I really hope that my child will ask me one day what racism is, because it won't exist anymore. So thank you for staying in tune, and we'll see you very, very soon. Bye.